Good afternoon. My name is Jason Johnson, amateur radio operator Kilo 3, Juliet Sierra Juliet, and this is the third video in the series I'm doing for Bowie Wireless Association on digital mobile radio. In the first video, I talked about some of the whys behind DMR in terms of what are the drivers for why it's being used and why we should care about it. In the second video, What DMR?, I discussed some of the key differences that DMR has over analog and similarities, as well as important definitions that are frequently used in the operation of DMR. So for this next video, what I'm going to be doing is covering some of the examples of what my programming software looks like to kind of tie in the concepts from the second video and how I would program my radio to function. So I talked in the last video about this concept of a zone, and a zone is this is a way for me to kind of group the communications that I care about. So I had an example, the October simulated emergency test was one of the zones in my radio. I also had my local hotspot as a zone, local repeaters, and then the Bowie Wireless Association as an example zone. So what you see on this slide here is a screenshot from my programming software that I'd use to define the zone called OCT, the October Simulated Emergency Test. So the information in pink is the number, the zone number, and as well as a name. So I have a name called OCTSET, and that name will appear in my radio menu that I can select. And then what is in brown is information about the channels that I defined for my radio for this particular zone. And I have 4 channels here defined. The first one is the BWA simplex channel. And what you'll see here is I have 4 channels. The first channel is the frequency of your Bowie Wireless Association simplex that we use to talk between each team member. The next one is a repeater frequency that we use to coordinate among teams. And I had 2 additional channels. One that was for digital APRS. I was sending my position report to my hotspot that connected internet to report our location to aprs.fi. And then the fourth one is an analog APRS frequency. I also had in my vehicle for that a Raspberry Pi that was beaconing the analog APRS to the internet as well. And just like an analog radio, you can have a primary VFO and a secondary VFO. So I picked the BWA simplex as my primary, and then the digital APRS as the secondary.
I'm sorry if you see anything weird.
Now, the next screenshot this shows the channel definition that I program my each particular channel in. Some of these terms will be familiar from your experience with analog, and some of the other ones, which I talked about in the second video, are specific to DMR. So let's go ahead and go through some of these in order. So in brown is some of the information. So I have number 77. So that equates to memory position 77 in the radio. That is the number this particular information is stored in. And I've given this name N3LHD BMMDSW. So the convention I use for repeaters is I list the repeater call sign first, N3LHD, which is Upper Marlboro, Maryland. The next one I use is the network, the DMR network I'm connecting to. So BM is Brandmeister. It's a large global network. And then the last section is the name of the talk group. In this case is MDSW, the Maryland statewide. In orange is the RF information that I programmed for this particular channel. And this is the receive frequency, 444.65 for the N3LHD repeater, as well as that's the one of the frequency pairs, and the next one is the transmit 449.65. Other things that have to be defined for the channel. My particular radio supports analog and digital, so I have to choose, this is going to be a digital channel. I picked the power I'm going to use for this transmission. Generally with me connecting this, I'll be mobile. So I have it set to high power, which is 7 watts. I can actually change it through pushing a button on my radio to lower that if needed. And then a couple other things I'll point out to you is the color code and the slot number. So color code, it's a numeric value that gets assigned to kind of bend the communications. In order for DMR to work, you have to understand, in order for it to work with a repeater, you have to be on the same color code. And these are published through, say, local websites. The Delmarva DMR website has a number of different operators around the East Coast that have their repeaters networked. So you can go to that website and you can see for each individual repeater kind of the communications plan on what color code that repeater uses, what time slots, so what the color code you should use when making communications. There's a lot of talk groups that you can connect to, but not all the repeaters support all of them. So you'll find on that website the talk groups, as well as what talk groups get mapped to what time slot. So I obtained this information by looking at the Delmarva DMR and seeing what time slot the Maryland statewide talk group was on. And then the information in purple, you'll see the contact is who I want to communicate with. In this case, it's called MD-State-SW. That's the Maryland statewide. I'll show that in a little bit where you define that. And then the radio ID. So this is the DMR ID. In my radio, I can put, that's like just a name that I can associate. And then what it actually gets set to is my DMR ID. So in order for a communication to happen with the local, from my radio to the local repeater N3LHD, these are the fields I had to set up. And the information I got is there's a list of talk groups I'm interested in. I obtained that information from the website, and then I looked at the Delmarva DMR to figure out what time slot I should be using for that particular talk group. And I just added that information into this channel when I programmed it. So here is a list of talk groups that I have programmed in my radio. You can go to Brandmeister Network to get a list of all the talk groups. And then from that, you can kind of pick and choose which ones you may be interested in, and then you can program that into your radio. So for my radio, there's a separate menu for the talk group listing, and there's a couple different columns here. The first column is the talk group IDs. This is a numeric number. The next one is a call alert. So if I want an alert to sound whenever I get a call from that talk group, I'll put that there. The third column is the name. This is my English name, the English name I give to that talk group, and that's the name I would pick in the programming software to select that for a particular channel. And then the fourth channel is the call type. So there's two types of calls that you frequently will see with DMR. The first one is a private call. So with a private call, for example, maybe I want to reach Doug White, KC3VJS. I can make a private call to him, which essentially is just point-to-point between us two individuals. The other way of doing this is a group call. So with a group call, you can actually have more people involved in that conversation. Generally, on repeaters, there'll be kind of group calls, and you have to pick for a given channel what kind of call you want that to be. One thing I'll point out before I go to the next slide is you'll see there's a talk group here for Parrot 9990, and that essentially is like an echo test. So if you have your channel programmed, you want to make sure your radio and your hotspot are working properly, you could use that particular talk group 9990. And when you key your radio, you could connect into that talk group, and whatever you say, you speak into that, identifying yourself by call sign, make a test message, unkey the push to talk, and if everything's set up properly, your radio should unmute, and you should hear what you said back to you. So for your hotspot, that number is 9990. However, for the Delmarva DMRs, their number is 9998. So that's something I had to learn. I was using this, the parrot 9990, and the parrot wasn't working on the repeater, and I had to actually create a different talk group for that one, for 9998. And I think I called it, I don't remember the particular name. I think it was Delmarva Parrot, maybe. It's not on this screen, but it's on a different screen. Okay, I'll briefly talk about repeaters. I won't go into a lot of detail with this. So just like analog communications, you can send digital DMR over a repeater. And in this particular scenario, right, I have at the top of the screen, I have a local radio, right, and I have here, right, my DMR radio, the NE21878, and I can connect this radio one of two ways. The first way is, which I've talked a little bit about, is through a hotspot. So this is like simplex communication to the hotspot, and it goes over IP address into this Brandmeister network. So Brandmeister is a large network where a lot of communications get brokered to different talk groups. The second path I have is going over another frequency channel, say to a repeater, and that's shown with the antennas here on the right hand side. And for this particular case, it's connecting to talk group 51518. So the repeater connects over an IP network to Brandmeister as well. And say, for example, maybe that's a group call to a talk group that's, say, worldwide. I have other users here, maybe on an Android phone. They're running a soft client on their phone, connecting to their own local kind of equipment. That's also connected to Brandmeister. So if, for example, there's a net running on talk group 51518, I can push the talk my radio. It goes over the RF channel through the repeater to Brandmeister, and then any other users that are kind of subscribed to that communication, that will get routed to their radio. So that's a very nice feature of DMR. You have networking through analog repeaters over a geographic area, but because this works using digital communications and IP, it can cover a much larger geographic area. Now, some would say, well, that's great, but what happens in an emergency, right? I don't have the internet. What if the internet goes down? So not all repeaters have to go through the internet. You can have a standalone repeater. So for example, N3LHD, if it lost its connection to Brandmeister, you would still be able to communicate over the local 9 talk group. So any user within that geographic footprint would be able to talk with one another until, say, that network got connected back up and reestablished. Another example, kind of as a private DMR network, would be University of Maryland Hospital System. They have their own network of DMR repeaters, and those are kind of with their own scope. They don't connect to Brandmeister, for example, currently. Not to say that they couldn't, but not currently. Before I leave this slide, I do want to point out you need to consult the repeater operator webpage or documentation, because not all talk groups are supported on the repeater. So generally on your hotspot, you can connect to any of the ones on Brandmeister, but maybe for the repeater, they don't want to connect up the worldwide talk group. Talk group 91 worldwide, it's very chatty, and you have a lot of traffic on that. All right. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go a little bit more detail on the plan that repeaters use for what talk groups are available. So we talked about in video 1 and 2 that with DMR you have 2 time slots, time slot 1 and time slot 2. So what I've shown here is the interstate network plan for the local N3 LHD repeater. So a new concept I'm introducing now, with talk groups you have something called a static talk group and you have a dynamic talk group. So a static talk group is something that's always on. It's always connected, it's always there. So whenever you hear communication, say from the Brandmeister network that's coming across into the talk group, if it's connected, it'll kind of rebroadcast that out. Versus a dynamic talk group is there may be, like for example, a talk group that is on the other repeaters that are communicating, but it's not until a user local to that repeater requests to talk to that talk group will the audio be routed. So on N3LHD, talk groups that are full-time available and are static, it's the local 9, it's time slot 1. So local 9-1, talk group 9, time slot 1, it's always on. So if I were to make a call into that talk group 9, time slot 1, anyone else listening to that talk group and time slot would hear my communication. Another one that is always on is the talk group 3172, so Northeast Regional. So if, say for example, someone else in, say, New York keyed up on that talk group, that would be automatically routed and broadcast on the local repeater. The next example, for time slot 1, those are the ones that are static. For all other cases, for time slots, for talk groups that they do allow, and you need to consult their web page, they're essentially dynamic, which means on demand. So whenever I key, say, maybe I want to connect to Maryland statewide 3124, I can key my radio to connect with that, and the talk group gets brought up on that repeater, on that time slot, for up to 15 minutes. So as long as there's a communication in that 15-minute time frame, that will be up. Otherwise, say that it goes idle, it will be torn down. So that's time slot 1. On the same repeater for time slot 2, there's several different local static talk groups. The first is local 2, and it probably should say local 2-2, that's a typo on my part. But what this one is within the local repeater operators, they've agreed to interwork their repeaters. So if someone would go to time slot 2 and connect to talk group 2, that communication would be not only heard at the N3LHD repeater, but other DMR repeaters within the Washington, D.C. area. So that's nice for kind of geographic coverage. If maybe some weather event happened or the storm was on its way, maybe somebody in northern Virginia could log in to their local repeater on talk group 2 and say, hey, severe weather just started here, and that would get routed across local repeaters, and we could hear it here in Upper Marlboro. So that's a nice feature that you can have kind of geographically bound talk groups that are static and talk to one another. The next one is PINMAR talk group 8, which I've not used, but that's available. And then the next one is local 9-2. Now these are my names, 9-2. So it's talk group 9 time slot 2. Sorry, I forgot to switch that back. And the rest of the talk groups here are dynamically assigned based upon the user's push to talk. The statewide would be on time slot 2. I said 1, but it should be on 2. So the statewides are connected here. And then also, if you want to make a call to the parrot to do an audio test, that would be on time slot 2. And then the talk group is 9998. So why is it important to understand what groups are on what time slot? So if I program my radio, for example, to make a call to talk group 9990 parrot, right? That is not the right number for this particular network, and it won't go anywhere. If I program the parrot 9998, okay, that's the right talk group. If I put it in time slot 1, that's not the right place to route that call. So you really have to pay attention with the local operator in terms of what talk groups do they support, what time slot are those present on, or what they should be on, and that's what it uses to route the various calls. Okay, so I've covered quite a bit in this video. I'm going to take a break here and go ahead and I have, I think, about 18 more slides. So thank you for watching this video, and I hope that you will tune in to the next.